Welcome to the Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. Today we have a special two-part show. I hope you tune into both part one and part two. But let me tell you a little bit about the show. We are seen here at LTVEH. Just go on the website and look at Video on Demand, and you'll find us there. We are also on YouTube. You have to search my name, Linda Maria Frank. That's who I am, author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. We have a Facebook page. If you're interested in asking us a question or being on the show, please message me through that Facebook page, and I will eventually get back to you. Okay, today we really have this very interesting show because we're going to present facts, ideas, and personal experiences about issues concerning authors. Because if you are thinking about writing a book, you have written a book, you have published a book, or you're a newly published author, there are many, many issues that you will find become problematic if you don't know anything about them, and there are a lot of opportunities that you can miss. We are members of Long Island Authors Group. We have Roland Allnach, who is our president, and he is a writer of
6 books: supernatural, horror, paranormal, science fiction. Also did a writer's book. So book number 7 on the way.
Book number 7 on the way. And Lois W. Stern, who has written
more recently the Tales to Inspire series of books, which is actually a contest for authors worldwide to submit true short stories that will inspire others.
Okay, and I'm Linda Maria Frank, I already said that, and I have written the Annie Tillery Mystery Series, and also a new book for teachers where I took my first book of the series, The Madonna Ghost, and I made it into a teaching tool. So we're not going to start with writing today because we think that writing happens to be an item that people approach in different ways. So we're going to start with publishing, and Roland's going to talk about the various ways you can publish, because you don't have to just do traditional publishing. You can go other routes.
Yes. For many authors coming into the marketplace, they just see the number of publishers. They may not understand yet the different avenues to go. So let's start with the basic, and the one that people will probably hear about most often is self-publishing. We're just going to go pros and cons for each one. So self-publishing, obviously the immediate pro is you hire the publisher, you sign your publishing contract, your book will be published. So you know that there is going to be an end product. And for most people, obviously when they're starting, they only have one book. They're not thinking of necessarily a long-term publishing relationship. So self-publishing is a very direct path to realizing the dream of being published. Now, what goes with self-publishing? Well, if you want to consider them cons, but there's just a difference to consider, and one is the cost of publication. Whereas with traditional publishing, the publishers will cover the cost of publication. With self-publication, it will be upon the author to pay for the publication of the book. This will include their editing expense, cover design, layout, Kindle conversion, etc. So that will be paid up front. The backside of that is once the book is published, they will realize a higher royalty rate, typically in the 70% range. So in essence, for self-publishing, it's a direct route. It's usually a relatively short time frame between hiring for the package and the book being published, and you have a better royalty rate at the end. The big catch being that you have to pay for the book production up front. Now, when you move into traditional publishing, as I said before, traditional publishers will front the expense of the book production. So basically, for you to be published, it costs you $0, unless you choose to do editing beforehand, but that would be your choice. The catch is with traditional publishing, you have to submit, you have to go through an editorial vetting process. You may be sending out your book for 2 years before you get an acceptance from a publisher. So there is certainly a greater time factor there. In essence, there is a question mark to your time factor because you have to wait for that approval. Once the book goes to production, like I said, then there's no cost to you. But when the book comes out, you now have to, in essence, earn back the cost of the production, which is why in traditional publishing, the royalty rate is much lower than self-publishing. Now, depending where you are in traditional publishing, that royalty rate will vary. For most people starting new, they will be with a small publisher, maybe a mid-sized publisher. At that point, you're looking at a 40% royalty rate. So there's a big difference there.
And the advance, so people always talk about, oh,
Yes.
I got a letter from a traditional publisher and they're giving me an advance. And isn't the advance the amount of money that they give you for the rights to the book? So you have no rights to the book anymore except the copyright, really.
Well, not necessarily. Typically now, well, for one, the advance is something you're not going to see among small-scale publishers. You're not going to see
No,
advance
no.
probably until you're moving up into the upper mid-range to the large publishers, you know, your Random Houses and the big players. But with that said, the advance is typically, these days, for the author to invest in marketing. And the advance you then have to earn back against the sales
That's right.
of the book.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
It was my understanding that you had to sell enough books to cover that advance.
Yes.
Otherwise, you'd have to give them the money back in a certain period of time,
well,
depending on your contract.
Yeah, exactly. That would depend on your contract. Typically with the larger publishers, because a lot of them still use a print run model where they print X number of books and then try to sell them. If you don't sell enough books on the first run to earn back your advance, which basically means that you are operating at a loss, it is unlikely you will see a second print run, which means essentially after the first print run
You're
runs
dead.
its sales course, right, you're dead in the water. So while as appealing as an advance may sound, there are a number of pretty significant caveats that go with it. But when you're talking about moving upward scale in the traditional publishing world, as you go from mid-sized publishers and then make the leap to the large publishing houses, first thing there is you will need an agent. Typically, the large publishers will not even look at a manuscript unless it's fronted by an agent. Either that or you have to be a breakout in the author, where the publisher then contacts you and offers you a contract. But even at that point, if your sales are doing that well, it is probably been in your best interest to get an agent because the world becomes much more complex
yes,
then.
yes.
And if nothing else, you will need
At
an
least
industry insider on your side to make sure you are
And a
protected
lawyer.
correctly.
And a
Correct.
lawyer.
Yes. Well, many agencies have either a legal resource they can refer you to or in-house lawyers. So they'll be watching that out for you as well.
Now, both of you have traditionally published and
Yes.
self-published. So, Lois, we haven't heard from you yet. So, what did you think were the advantages of both?
It really was not traditional publishing. When I did my first two books, they were with Infinity Publishers, which at that time was a print-on-demand company.
What's print on demand?
Print on demand has sort of fallen away now that we have Create Space to do that, because basically it was the same, except that Infinity got a lot of the royalty because you had to still format your book, just like you did with Create Space. Okay. But I will interject this if I can show this, because I did do an article, Lois W. Stern Simplifies Publishing Choices for New Authors, and I thought it was an article people might like to look at. 4 ways to publish, which one's for me, and I wrote about traditional advantages and disadvantages of each and what you need to know as background. So a lot of what Roland said, independent press, advantages, disadvantages, and hybrid publishing, which we don't hear so much about anymore. I thought it was a great idea at the time, but I'm not hearing too much about it. But I can give you that website if you're interested later to look at that.
What we can do is if the people who are watching, the viewers, are interested in any of this information, you can message me through that Facebook page and give us your email, and we can email you those documents. That's really not... everything that we have is pretty much on a document anyway, can be emailed. So if you're that interested, certainly have at it.
Yes.
Disadvantages. What do you see as disadvantages of the ways that you published?
The disadvantages. The marketing is 100% up to you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and that's, I think, pretty well true Across the spectrum, even with a large publisher, a lot of people think with a large publisher, I don't have to worry about my marketing. The publisher will take care of that. The reality of that is they will do some marketing for you. They will do a lot more if you come to them with your own marketing plan. So I like to call it a force multiplier. So if you bring 0, whatever they have times 0 is basically going to be 0. I mean, they will do things, but they will probably most likely be formulaic, boilerplate type plans. But if you go with them and say, well, I've done an interview on this show, or I've appeared at this bookstore, the large publisher now can then use their influence to get you right at the top of that. Or if they know that you've done talk shows and that you're comfortable speaking and you're a good speaker, they can now elevate you and use their contacts to get you into more premium exposure outlets.
They do arrange a lot of book tours for you, do they not? If you're willing to travel and do that?
Yeah, and again, that depends on your availability, and you most likely having shown some experience in conducting yourself during these things.
Right.
Because there is a certain protocol and everything
Sure.
to follow when you do these types of events. And certainly they want to see that you have a following.
Right.
The biggest thing, particularly when you're talking with large agents, you have to go through an agent first. The agent, the publisher, the author, everybody wants to sell books. By showing an agent that you have an established following, that you have sales outlets for your books, is going to encourage the agent to say, well, here's someone who has an economic future here. There's an economic validity here. That's not, again, now not just for the agent's concern, not just for your concern, but you have to keep in mind the agent now has to sell you as a business prospect, not just as a book and an author, to a publisher. So if a publisher sees that, oh, here's author Smith who has, a new book, but nobody knows about him, or here's, Agent Jones, and she's been out doing the tours, doing what she could, and she's got 10,000 people following her, we're going to pick Agent Jones because there's much more of a business prospect there.
Right. It's
So-
all a matter of making money. I mean,
Yes.
we start with something that's very idealistic and esoteric, the art of writing, and we all have the story that we wish to get out, and it's all very, very lovely and idealistic, and then you get into the world of publishing and you find out that everything has to do with money. I believe that the major publishing houses have now condensed into 5 major ones. They gobble up each other. And most of them have a self-publishing division.
Yes.
And I'm eventually going to talk about book distributors, and even the book distributors have self-publishing packaging. Self-publishing, when I self-published my first book, it was kind of on the cusp where self-publishing was becoming accepted. And now there's a lot of support for self-publishing, and there are a lot of advantages to it. My own experience with publishing, I only self-published because I started this really pretty late in my life. It was like a second career, and I don't really call it a career, I call it a hobby. I don't want to get too technical about it, but certainly it takes up a lot of my time. My first 4 books, the first 4 books in the Annie Tillery mystery series, I did the first 2 with iUniverse, the second 2 with Archway. Archway is a division of Simon & Schuster. And they offer packages. All of these places offer packages. You can take a very minimal package, which just they edit the book, they give you an editorial review, tell you what to change and whatnot, and no marketing. And they publish the book for you. And then you go all the way up to the $20,000 package, which will and they will tell you how to convert your book into a script and how to you put it on a website or a catalog or a database that producers look at when they're looking for new movies, and do anything for you. They just tell you how to do it for $20,000. So okay, I
You
was
didn't take that one.
no. I'm still in the realm of wishing to be discovered, okay, by somebody. But anyway, I took a package that included 2 very important things. One of them was, because they're still called print-on-demand books. One of them was book returnability. And what that means is that if they buy from the publisher, if a bookstore, Barnes & Nobles, let's say, buys from Amazon, and they can't sell the books, then they can return the books. They don't have to eat the cost. I don't have to eat the cost.
That was one thing, Linda, that Infinity did do.
yeah.
They would take the books back.
Yeah, see, that's a
that-
good thing.
that is a
And,
big thing, yes.
The other thing is they promised to put me on book distributor catalogs. And having worked my life in schools, I knew that there were certain catalogs that are used by the school for textbooks and also the school library, and I know that bookstores use them as well, and your public library uses them, so I thought that was great. And I paid for that. The fifth book, which is, as I said, based on one of the books in the series and is a teaching tool, I did on CreateSpace. Did not spend a cent, okay? Except I paid my illustrator to do the covers, because I can't do that unless you're into stick figures. So that was really cheap, but now I'm in the process of trying to get onto, I'm trying to market. I'm trying to get the book out there, because I went from CreateSpace and then you go directly to Kindle Direct, because Kindle Direct does put you out
Right.
on, in fact, I encourage anybody who has a book with an ISBN number to go on Google and Google your ISBN number, and you will find out where your books are sold. Okay? So I'm like this now, in that, all right, I spent so much for this package and I got all this stuff. I got Book Expo and all kinds of little goodies. It was okay. And then CreateSpace, where I spent nothing, but I'm going to be nickel and diming myself to death for years trying to get my book out there. So I don't know which, I'll tell you in 10 years what it will be.
Well, I think there's, no matter which publishing route you choose, aside, leaving the large publishers aside, because that is a very different realm. But if you are self-published, if you did it publishing under your own imprint, if you're with a small indie publisher, you're always going to find that the marketing is your own responsibility. And even the other thing you learn, and I think that a lot of authors don't understand in the beginning, is you're going to be paying at some point. So whether you, as you was describing, is you paid up front for a package that included some of your marketing, you're paying there, or afterwards paying for it piecemeal, marketing is an investment. And there really is no getting around that reality. A lot of people talk about social media. You're investing time then. And you may be investing money as well for advertisement
Depends on what
and
it is,
all the
sure.
little intricacies there. But yeah, and I think that's an important lesson there, because authors need to understand you have to try to be thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead of yourself. And one important point I'd like to bring out with that is, while it may be very appealing for authors to say, I just want to jump right ahead, get the agent, go to the large publisher, and be on my
Lots
way.
of luck.
I think, well, one, yes, lots of luck. But I think it's very important to do your time and earn your stripes, so to speak, in the indie or self-published world, because all those lessons you learn, the intricacies of marketing, how the various mechanics of the publishing world work, all those lessons will make you an experienced author. So that if that time ever does come where you have that opportunity to be with a large publisher, you'll be talking on terms with them, you'll understand the background things, you'll know what questions to ask, and you will be an advocate for yourself rather than just being led along. And that's a very important thing,
And
think,
I
for
would
people to
say,
understand.
Roland, in most things, to start local.
Yes.
You want some exposure,
Yes.
go to your local papers.
Yeah.
I learned
local
that through my
library.
own
Yeah.
mistakes. When I first presented my first book at Book Review, which was local for me, I contacted everybody on my list, and I said at that time, let's prove it to Book Review that even a local author can get out the crowds. And boy, did I get out the crowds then. That was fabulous. But I had just retired from education, so I had a lot of my colleagues, as well as my friends and relatives, neighbors, whatever. But it was a great turnout for that. So that would be my first word of advice: start local.
Yeah, I think it's very tempting for people, like I call it the go big or go home philosophy. I certainly tried it. And I think the thing for people to understand is when you try to market yourself on a national or even global scale with the internet, there's really no limit. You have now put yourself in competition, so to speak, with the prominent A-list authors. And you know, the way search engines